Welcome back to the Lost Boys of Hannibal podcast. I'm your host, Franki, and with me as always,
Chris. Ketters?
Yes.
I always feel weird about saying Ketters at the end.
Why?
I don't know. It's just like, should I say just Chris?
It's your last name.
I like it.
Okay, so you got 4 seasons, you got real famous, so you're just Chris. And so with us, joining us is Candace. Better?
Hi, guys.
How you doing? And Candace is the daughter of Denise.
Hello.
And Denise is the sister of the boys, Billy and Joey.
This is not the first time that Denise has been here. Second time, I believe. Maybe even third time.
Yes.
Yeah. So welcome back.
Thank you.
We're in this nice, cool studio that Frankie built.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. My buddy Josh Smith helped us build this. So, he's done a really, really good job of, everything. So we're excited to actually have a space where we can do some YouTube. I think that what's been missing from our show is that we show stuff, we show diagrams, we talk to diagrams, but now you're actually going to be able to see those diagrams as we progress.
The only problem is I've been told for many, many years I have a face for radio. So I don't know how this is going to work.
I can't help you there. And sew a head on or something, or green screen your face.
Yeah. Can we do that, please?
You can just input things in there.
That'll work. Okay. Let's do that.
So this is a fun episode. So we get to have actually a little bit of what, and everybody's a moviegoer, right? So this is kind of like the prequel to what Lost Boys of Hannibal podcast actually meant. And I think we waited for YouTube to actually do this to really get some kind of, visceral reactions from people. But a lot of people don't know the real John Wingate story, how that all started. They really don't know all the crazy occurrences that happened with John Wingate and the family. And so I thought, what a great episode to invite him on. And let's talk about some of the stuff that was kind of off the camera and off our sets and off our podcast that we really wanted to get into. And because we kind of came into this as people have probably just started listening to get that first episode. And when you get that first episode and it's like, okay, to talk about 1967, we haven't involved the family. And I think the whole first season, we don't involve you guys at all. And that was kind of like our path forward. But there was something else going on when we started this podcast. There was something else going on when Souls Speak launches, right? The second book that Wingate puts out. So I don't know, Chris, do you want them to kind of take you through some of take the audience through some interesting stuff that's been
I mean, where do we start? We kind of, when we started season 1, we did a lot of our information research based off of the book, but then we quickly found out there was much better research out there. But let's take it from your guys' perspective, because Denise, you guys were starting out with dealing with John and doing stuff with that. So give us the laydown. It seemed like everything was pretty kosher at first, right? I mean, the book writing and all that, it was pretty good, right?
Yes, it was at first. How it got started is when the
first book came out. Yeah, we went to the book signing.
Right.
And I don't know how much of the book signing you want to go into, but I think you're trying to get to where Soul Speak kind of came about. Right. We had a cousin who was at the book signing, not the one that we were at, but at a different one. And she is sensitive and has some abilities, and she saw the boys. And the boys apparently said, she can see us, and it kind of all started from there.
Okay.
And then she has a connection with one of the other psychics, or has some abilities. Her husband, I'm going to let Candace tell you.
It is her husband's cousin's wife.
Okay.
Yes.
So she reached out to her and said, hey, I'm going to send you a picture. I want you to tell me what you get. And so she sent the picture over to her, and she basically got the same information that our cousin had gotten, which was that John Gacy was involved with the boy's disappearance. At that point, they called my Aunt Lenny and started talking to her about it. And then Aunt Lenny started talking to John Wingate. That's where it kind of all started.
So is your cousin, so your cousin talked to the other mediums that were aboard, and they all came to, so was it the cousins that came up with the idea of John Wayne Gacy being involved, or?
Well, actually, Mom had went to a reading with Brittany before all of that.
Okay.
And Brittany had brought up John Gacy. And at that time, we kind of went, okay, maybe, right? And probably dismissed it a little bit, I think, until the other two then came forward and talked to us. We're like, whoa, how's this happen? All three of them, right, are coming up with kind of the same scenario. And then that's when we kind of all then started going, okay, maybe there is something more to this.
So Brittany Buckwalter is the one we're talking about, and we'll have her on in a couple of weeks here, and we'll probably bring this up again. But so that's kind of where this all takes place, because as this is going on, right, Soul Speak's about to launch. Chris is going to read that book. He's going to reach out to my partner, Jeremy King. Okay, this is how it's kind of cool, right? You kind of start seeing like how this is all fitting together. He reads the book Soul Speak, or maybe I think it's the first.
No,
book
it was
you
Soul
read.
Speak.
It was Soul Speak, and I give Chris like I basically pitch me 5 minutes and let me see if I can put the limp stuff aside and we can do this. And we ended up staying I think 2 hours on a phone call or something like that. And then I decided to come up, and he showed me the area, and then I brought all the podcast equipment. I think we podcasted out of the Holiday Inn the first time, or Holiday Inn Express out in Hannibal. It had just been built by the hospital, and so we started putting it together. But it was the John. I want people to know that it's not that we have this arrogance that we know it's not John Wayne Gacy. It's just that we started there, and a lot of our beginning research was based on John Wayne Gacy. That if this is going to be the person, I mean, this is somebody that we know for a fact abducted more than one boy at one time, and he did it twice. He was able to pick up people. So it was definitely intriguing to see that there was a true crime angle that I loved, and then you get more into the story where now you have this split path right now, right?
I think it has a lot to do too with that. When I contacted you, I knew you were into the paranormal side of things, and there was a huge paranormal aspect to that when this whole thing with these mediums, all three of them, and granted, John made a very readable book, and so having the paranormal aspect was something I knew you guys were interested in with Shift Films, and so we were taking this kind of as a paranormal aspect to begin with.
Sure. I think me and you were very, very much into the paranormal at that time.
Yeah.
We have since subsided. I think you have a pandemic that comes into that, so the ghost hunting, and it kind of just.
Plus, I ain't afraid of no ghosts. So.
Except for when they touch your back.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. So, okay, well, I'll have you. Yeah, go ahead.
I do want to say, though, when Brittany said John Wayne Gacy, or when she said John, do you know who I'm talking about? And I did because of the book. And I'm like, I shook my head, and she goes, you don't think he had anything to do with it? I'm like, no. And she asked me why. Well, my uncle had sent dental records to Chicago, and so that they could check it with the remains of what was there. And it came back that none of the remains there were my brother's.
Yeah, and so you're talking about Detective Jason Moran out of Cook County Sheriff's. And yeah, so he's leading that investigation. And when that was happening, there were still 8 bodies that were unidentified. They had found the bodies. They were in the basement with the 33, but these 8 had not been identified. And since then, 2 of the 8 have been identified. So now there's only 6 that remain. But we do know for a fact, if you're listening for the first time or you want to jump on YouTube and listen to this one, we do know for a fact that as far as John Wayne Gacy goes with the house in Cook County, the 6 remaining are not any part of the Dow. Well, not any part of the Hoags. We can't say that definitively about the Dows. We don't know if they ever sent anything in. So that's interesting. So we have this bridge, right, of John Wayne Gacy, right? And this kind of gets everybody intrigued. So we haven't met you guys. We don't know you guys, but we'd read the book and we're starting our podcast. And then simultaneously, you're about to go to this book signing, right, with Soul Speak, correct?
It was the first book. Soul Speak wasn't out at that time.
Okay.
Right. So we went to the first book signing.
And how was that experience?
It was good at first. We bought a book to have the author sign, and then I think we waited in line for about an hour and a half
longer,
for him to sign it. But
so that book did pretty well then.
I think so.
So you're saying that you waited an hour and a half for a book signing for the...
There was a lot of talking as people were going up to sign. There was a lot of stories being shared and told. And I can't say that us waiting for an hour and a half was a complete waste of time, because we did get to, sit down with a gentleman who did was part of the search
That's
back
Jerry
in
Vineyard.
'67. I believe so. I feel like that's who it was, just based on our conversations. But yeah, and so we had a really good conversation with him that was really nice to hear, of him just sitting down and saying, you know, I really felt like I let your family down by not finding him. But we got to kind of talk a little bit further with him too.
Can you talk a little bit about what Jerry Vineyard had said? I know that we had talked a little bit before we started podcasting, but there was some really intriguing stuff about, you know, his perspective on you know, what he saw, because I mean, this eyewitness thing is getting out of hand now. It's really big right now between what really is eyewitness testimony anymore and how people forget within 3 minutes of something that, oh God, you know. But I want to be clear that Jerry was one of the investigators. He was one of the cavers. He was actually in the cave, correct?
Correct.
And we had talked about him before in previous episodes, right, Jay?
Yeah. Jerry's been, and it's so amazing because Julie Angel, who's been on the show a few times, she came across some information that Jerry posted on a forum. You remember back in the early 2000s, it was all about forums on the internet. It wasn't about, you know, Facebook and stuff like that. Anyway, it was a caving forum, and it's so crazy because he was talking about how much he regretted not finding the boys, and that was 20 years ago. So, you know, I never really thought of it until you guys talked about it, saying that you think it was Jerry that you saw at that book signing, because that is a guy that 40 years after the fact, he held that, and he struggled with it. You could tell
it really affected him.
Yeah.
I mean, he got down on his knees in front of Mom and I and had tears in his eyes and said, I'm so sorry I let your family down.
Wow.
I always felt like we could have done more.
Wow.
So one of the things that he said he always felt like maybe they could have done a little differently is when they came across the rock piles or the mud piles on the bottom of the cave floor, he felt they should have dug into those piles to see if the boys were underneath it.
Yeah.
So he believed there might have been like a ceiling collapse or
Yeah, he believed that there was a chance of that.
So the boys would have been hit with the ceiling and then kind of pushed in, and then everybody was trampling on top. Was that kind of the story he told?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he said like the tops of the caves would have mud, and then with them dynamiting, that the caves could have came down, or the mud could have came down on top of them and covered them.
Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing, and we're gonna hopefully talk with some other people that were involved with the investigation back then and with the searching, and I have a feeling that's gonna be heard multiple times again, that, you know, these people put out their heart and soul literally into the search back in 1967. And it's crazy to think, again, like 40 years down the road, and they're still holding that with them. You know, that's amazing. So, yeah,
it's intense. And the weird thing too, is that we've asked on our podcast and on Facebook to, if you have any film, if you have any footage, if you know anybody that does, like, please submit it. And then when we try to go to any kind of a news station or anything like that, they want these unsurmountable amounts of money, but they can't guarantee that it actually will be the boys. So they basically say, well, we can give you, you know, 5 certain things, but it's $100 per. So it's like $500, but you're not guaranteed that it's that story. Like, nobody, I just can't imagine this national case. Like, if you think about like Martin Luther King, everything that's happening in 1967, right? Even the president JFK, right, is hot and heavy in 1967. There's a space race happening in 1967. There's a bunch of stuff that's going on that's getting all this footage and everybody's able to pull. But for some reason, this was a national case. You know, Vietnam was hot and heavy. And you have these very strange things where I can't get any footage. We can't find any footage from the news, but we know they were there because newspapers point to it and people talk to it. So once again, I mean, it's kind of a plea for like, hey, if there's pictures out there, if there's video out there, if you remember the news station, if you recorded it somehow, I don't know. But if there's anything out there, like, we really need to see, we believe, some of us believe that a suspect like a John Wayne Gacy could be in one of those videos. He could be, and somebody else that we'll talk about.
Yeah. I do want to point out real quick that the WGEM and KHQA were both in existence in that time. Those are 2 local TV stations. They did not have the footage. I did contact them both, and they just don't go back that far. So unfortunately, from a local standpoint, we didn't have anything available.
That's just sad.
I always thought it would be interesting if somebody had pictures of the mystery man up on the hill.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
God.
That's what I would love
Well,
to
just
see.
even, and we've talked about it. I think let's go ahead and get into that. I know we're kind of on a storyline, but
Sure.
Terry Hill's the other name that's being brought up. Of course, that's a name that we've been talking about, probably our number one suspect at this point in time. And we need, if we can find those pictures, we can possibly put a person there. We know he was there from an aspect of trying to do searching with the Department of Corrections, right?
Yeah.
And so we know he was there, but what if he was there like the next day before he was even called to come to help search?
Yeah, I mean, he's getting the information from somewhere, even Moberly, that sits, about an hour outside of Hannibal. Like, he's getting the information from somewhere. It could be local TV, it could be local news. But it is odd. It is strange that he's brought in it somehow. We don't know. See, that's the other hook, right? There's a gap. There's a missing link between how he gets involved. Like, who is somebody that would have contacted him? And the only other thing that I can think of, and this was brought up, and just so you guys know, we read all the comments on our Facebook. We might not always answer every one of them, but one that I keep seeing that's reoccurring, I have like an algorithm now where I can just search something and I can tell you how many times it's somebody asked that question or something around that question. And that one question is this pastor that was very close with Greg Dow, and how he would take Greg to certain things, and he had volunteered services at one point, right? We do know that Terry Hill was also youth ministry, was also involved with the church. So it is possible that that pastor said, hey, I know somebody within the church family that does tracking and stuff like that. Let me give him a call. So there's a link there that possibly could solve what that is and how Terrence Hill actually gets involved, because he's big in Moberly. We know he's a royal ambassador. We know that he knew friends of the boys. And so if you're going down that true path, listen, hey, do you know, this kid, get in, I'll give you guys a ride, and blah, 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 blah. And what's his name? That also, he lived right there by Charlie's house, right there on the corner. One of the boys that saw them that day.
Bill Dexheimer?
Big Bill Dexheimer. Yeah. And so we can put Bill Dexheimer and Tommy Terrence Hill and the Royal Ambassadors together.
We can actually put them at dinners together
at
the
Terry's
newspapers.
Hill.
Yeah, at Terry Hill's house. Yeah. So there's a lot of evidence that points to him. And actually, since we're on the subject, I think it'd be kind of fun to talk about real quick. You guys have heard where we're at with this. What's your thoughts on Terry Hill? Are we on a wild goose chase?
I don't know. I think at this point anything's a possibility, right? It gave me goosebumps when I came across the article that he was a royal ambassador at Southside Baptist Church, where our family went. Yeah. So I think it's a potential. Yeah, for sure. I think it needs to be looked at more.
Well, and we're going to go ahead and say this, but I think it'll come back around with Brittany, and I think it's important to kind of bring it up now, is that when you look at a picture of Terry Hill in the 60s, and you look at who he kind of looks like, he kind of looks like Gacy.
You can definitely...
The structure.
Exactly. Especially the way that... that's why we want to have Brittany on, and it's also something that we want to get together with the family too. We always get asked, and we have private sidebar conversations with people and messages being like, why are you involving mediums and ghosts and paranormal? You guys said that blah, 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 blah. And I've explained that on posts like, hey, 50 plus years, dude, you kind of use every trick in the bag, right? But with Brittany, when I've asked her specifically, like, what does a vision look like, right? And it's not that she is being told exactly what happened, right? Energy doesn't communicate that way. Energy can only show her things. Mm-hmm. And so if you get a picture that looks like the same stature of a John Wayne Gacy, and John Wayne Gacy has so much pull that it is possible to confuse the two, right? And she kept getting TT.
Yeah.
She got TT with John Wingate.
We thought it was in regards to a road.
Right. Yeah. But it's Tommy Terrence.
Right.
And it is eerie. Because when you look at statistically, when people and when kids and people in general are abducted, they know that person. It's not this 6 degrees of separation. It's somebody close to them. It's somebody in the church. It's somebody, an uncle, a family member, which is why that always gets rolled in too. But we've beat that dead horse. We've crossed those paths. Newer people listening to the podcast like, it's the family. I'm like, well, in some cases it is the family. You got strange cases all around. In this particular case, though, I do think that this person, if it is a true crime path, those boys knew that person that they got in a car with. Because they wouldn't have gotten in a car with him. They could have just walked 15 minutes down to the house. But it's Tommy Terrence. Like, he knows Dexheimer. He's in the Royal Ambassadors. Like, it could have been that easy. And that's something that when you look at the path, and I think you had done some good things where you actually look at that. We can't really talk about what you did, but you did see these maps. You did see what the roads look like, and that access, right? That hopefully one day we'll be able to show. But
well, and you got to think too, and this is something I haven't really processed till just sitting here thinking about it, is that, there was a Royal Ambassadors meeting going on that night, right? In Shelbina?
No. It was a junior. No, it wasn't a Royal Ambassador.
It wasn't,
no.
But it was in South Shelby, right?
Yeah.
But we had to double check on that, because if it was in Shelbina, that's where it was at. And so if there was a possibility it had something to do with some sort of function that Terry Hill could tell the boys, hey, I'm going there. You just want to ride with me since you missed the bus?
It was a youth group is what it is. And from what I was told, that every month they would go to a different church, the youth group would, but it wasn't the Royal Ambassadors.
Okay. Well, at either rate, though, I mean, if we're thinking about something along those lines where, they had to be on the bus to get there. So they get on the bus, they miss the bus. And so you have somebody like Terry Hill here that's like, oh, I can take you guys. I'm heading back to Moberly. I mean, it's along the way. And so then all of a sudden now you have him taking 3 boys miles and miles away from, Hannibal.
Yeah, and that stands to reason. Like, is there some kind of meeting notes? Is there something that do these kids, like when I went to youth group, you checked in. You signed your name, and it's like, okay, these are people that showed up because you have an attendance that you're taking throughout the year. I wonder if the church has those records. I wonder, because the problem with it is that isn't the church gone? Like, it doesn't even exist anymore, right?
I don't know about that. We never really tracked down that, to be honest with you, what the South Shelby or Shelbina, I keep saying South Shelby, but Shelbina church is.
Well, the other thing I thought could have been a situation too is, what if he was there to help preach at the Southside Baptist Church,
which he did
on that Wednesday night? We've known he was there preaching before.
Point.
What if he was actually in town for Southside Baptist Church that night?
That's something I've gone through like days before, and that's where I came up, because they're and I was going to try looking that up, but in the newspaper, it literally has Wednesday night they were going to such and such in Shelbina, and so I've seen that, but that's a good point. I've never gone and looked to see who the pastors, because usually they say who the guest pastors are going to be at a church for a night service.
Well, in the newspaper articles I was finding from where Terry grew up as well, or where he lived at the time, it would tell that church he preached at a lot. And it would tell every Sunday or Wednesday when he was serving preaching it, and I couldn't find where he was preaching at his own church that night.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
I could find the Sunday, and I could find other Sundays and Wednesdays, but I couldn't find that particular night.
So here's the fun thing about this podcast is we are literally doing the research right now. So yeah, I mean, it just goes down. There's a lot of paths with him, and it's scary to think about all the connections that he has. You got Royal Ambassadors, you got the family connections with the Dexheimers, you got all these connections. And then of course he comes back to help with the search. I mean, there's just so many things. And then of course, not only that, but the big piece on top of the cake is then he ends up going to prison in Texas for child molestation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's always stunned me that, like, you spoke about the goosebumps, and like you start seeing him appear more and more and more. And if you have a number one prime suspect, right? I mean, any cold case detective would tell you it doesn't come that easy, right? That's why it's a cold case, right? 120,000 cold cases, 1% are ever solved. Those are real statistics. But like in a case like this, like where it's the perfect crime. It's about to unfold into something that wasn't even considered kidnapping or missing kids, or it was never that. So you talk about, like, you could have done the deed and then come back and helped. I mean, it's really hard for me to kind of look at certain people's aspect of what actually is occurring from the perspective that, okay, well, we had a guy on here and says, well, not everybody that molests kills. But in that case, if you are a public figure, if you are doing a lot of pasturing, if you are doing a lot of things, this can't get out, right? Versus when you fast forward to Texas, it's not like that, right? You're kind of scatterbrained. You're between Florida, Texas, Missouri. But back then, I mean, he was written about a lot in the articles. He was kind of a public figure when you look about for a small town. He's talked about he's being appreciated by the Scouts. He's being appreciated by the Royal Ambassadors. His name is everywhere.
He started a 4-H program.
He did start a 4-H program, and that's where you get more kids. So this is a prime person that wanted to be around children, and we kind of know one of those reasons why, right? And then using religion, of course, as kind of like that vice where, it never happens there, right? And it just, to be clear, this is not the Catholic religion. This is another religion, but it happens everywhere, and it happens with every type of organization that's around kids, whether it's the, brothers and sisters, whether it's, United Way or, anything that relates children and people, you're going to find deviates get into those lines, from schools to private schools to all these types of things. So in my opinion, I mean, if you're talking suspects, he's prime. He's 100% prime suspect. We can put him in a lot of places, and we can put him at the dig, which is just, it's scary. But we just can't put them. There is a person that is of interest to us, right? There's a person out there. There was a child or a kid that was living with him, and that person's alive, right? And I would just kind of want to get their spin on, Terry as the person. This comes from the family. Like, hey, there was a couple people that live with him. I think one of them lives in Spain or something now. But the other one, I think, lives in Missouri.
The foreign exchange student.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had the foreign exchange student, and then you have this other person that was living with Tommy Terrence Hill. And he I think he lives out in West Missouri somewhere. So, I get people don't want to talk about it, right? But there are ones that got away, and there were the ones that didn't get away. And you got to start thinking about that too, because this is not about, me and Chris, hanging or, it's high-fiving because we solved something. It's about bringing closure, but also bringing other evidence to other detectives and to other precincts that are dealing with missing cases to think about, hey, we might want to go in this direction. We're not thinking about going in this direction. Think about Golden State Killer, right? The first guy on the scene when the first murder happened said, it's a cop. And they never listened to him. And then 40,000 documentaries later, everyone got it wrong, except for the cop on the first scene is like, this guy's a cop. And they couldn't hear that. So, I mean, how many times since then do we see that it's law enforcement? Do we see that it's, the person that's the closest to the family, that it's the uncle, the father, the mother? So there's a bunch of different things that do occur, that happen. And for Tommy Terrence Hill, it's just this one guy that kind of just like, I mean, you put him in a pool with John Wayne Gacy, and it's like, you can't even measure it. We got everything on him. But was he that guy? Was he the mystery man? Did he know John Wayne Gacy? You don't know. Like, you just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a deep hole to dive in, but we kind of got way off track, but that's okay. That's right. So let's kind of go back. So it's you guys,
YouTube. Here's an ad that'll make us millions of dollars.
Yeah,
probably not. 3 subscribers, guys.
Yeah, 3 subscribers.
3 are my emails.
It's almost like starting over the podcast. We're going to be watching the YouTube for a while.
100%.
Yeah, it's just going to be like 4 watchers, and it's going to be us watching it twice.
We need Chad to actually do something. Yeah. Maybe go on Scrambled, his new podcast.
Check that out, by the way. Scrambled. Yes. Chad Douglas. You guys know Chad from KHQA. It was a big help with us. He's got a podcast about child, kind of like child. Mental illness, yeah. So mental, so make sure to check it out. Scrambled, very cool podcast.
Brilliant podcast. Yeah, so really well done.
So let's kind of get back to what we were talking about. We were talking about John Wingate. So again, it seemed like everything was going all right with everything. You had to wait in line for a little while. When did the tables turn for you guys with John?
Yeah, because it seemed like in the beginning you and John were, getting along, getting on.
Well, he would call, or he would ask if he could talk to me. He never asked if he could interview me. We've had that argument. Candace, you want to tell this story because you tell it better than me.
I had never talked to John. Mom had done most of the communicating with him, but he had called and reached out to Mom at one point to see if the family would be willing to help pay to bring one of the psychics in from out of town. And at that time she had said, hey, let me talk to some of the other family. We'll think about it. And then the next thing we know, he had already arranged that with her. And so he had let us know that he had arranged that with her and wanted to know if mom wanted to go with him that day. He was going to take her out on a drive to see if she could identify where they could possibly be at. So we were scheduled to meet that day and go with them. And I think then they called and said it's going to be a little bit later or something.
He wanted to take her out to breakfast first and get acquainted. But then things really changed because he told her that we didn't want to go. We changed our mind.
But we didn't know that at the time. We thought we were meeting them all down at Mark Twain Dinette to go out on this drive. Then we find out they're a little late. They hey, we'll be in there just a little bit. And I think that's when we started getting that feeling something's not right. I think we even said, I think they went on out there. We just kind of had that feeling. And then they showed up, and that's when we find out that they did go ahead and go on the drive. And he had told the girl that we did not want to go, even though that was not the story at all. And I think even after that, we found out he had already taken the other 2 psychics out there without even telling us he was doing that. So I think that's about the point that things started going wrong, because then he was like, I guess we can go ahead and tell them, but we didn't want to let you know this before because we didn't want you to, start telling people and spreading rumors. And it's like, but we're family.
Yeah.
It got pretty heated at the Mark Twain Dinette, let me just tell you.
Yes.
Because I reminded him, it's my family, it's not yours.
Right.
And how do I know you're not going to go tell people? You took your brother with you. But you're telling me that I can't go, or I can't know anything, or I can't tell anybody? I don't think I've ever been so mad. I lost all my senses. It's like I was in a tunnel. And then my daughter jumped to the occasion.
She's good about that.
Yeah, and this is where you just hit him with a mug of root beer at the Mark.
Not quite that bad. I think I just was very vocal about the fact that we're the family and that we do deserve to know what's going on, and not kept out of it. And so from there, we actually took the drive that we were supposed to be on originally. She kind of took us through the steps that they had went through previously on the drive.
So then we went back to my house, and we sat and talked about where the location is. And I had a friend, my son's friend's father worked for Rawls County. And I said, well, let me just call him. I said, but should I get a hold of John first? And they're like, no. So I did. So we are the ones that initially went to Rawls County.
He was actually, everything just seemed to fall right in place. He just happened to be 5 minutes from my mom's house.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, you know what? I'll come stop by. Okay.
And I'm like, hey, you know the story about my brothers? He's like, yeah. I said, well, there's 2 psychics that led us to the same spot, has the same story. They've never met before.
It's actually 3.
Well, 3. Yeah, 3. One of them lives clear out of town. She's right here. And he's like, okay. He rode right with it. But now, Wingate's story is that he contacted the Rawls County. First, it was he contacted Marion County. Well, it wasn't in Marion County. And then that he contacted Rawls County. So needless to say, I have nothing to do with John Wingate, because to me, he's just wanting the money and the glory. He's wanting, that's all it was about was the book. It wasn't about my family.
Yeah, and it seems to be like that path because, in the beginning, and it just seems like everything that I've ever done in true crime or even in the paranormal that relates to some type of writer, and it's funny, but at the same time, it's really not, because I think that, people feel that because they're writing something that they somehow own the rights to that story, but you don't. That's why when John Wingate threatened to sue us, that never came to pass. because there's no grounds to sue us. A story from the media is exactly that. It's freedom of speech. You can basically say whatever you want. It's freedom from the press, which essentially is what me and Chris are doing. We're almost journalists in this, in the sense that with you guys, we're putting forth information. And this season is like, it's about throwing back at you like all the stuff we've gone through. And with John Wingate, it's just this reoccurring nightmare of a person that constantly thinks that for some reason he's allowed to have this type of like communal story, copyright, intellectual property, if you will, about the boys, which, he's gone off and doesn't even care anymore. And the reason why he's been so quiet is because Soul Speak is a fairly debunked book. I mean, we met with all the mediums. They're on film. We filmed all of them, and I won't reveal one's name because she asked not to be revealed, even with him. And we've given her that. We've not released any of that. But that got heated between me and her because there was a lot of days out there, and we'll get into the dig, and what we actually did. But this is interesting because it kind of almost segues into like what actually does occur when you hand off certain paperwork to Rawls County, right? When you hand off certain information about what's going on at that cement plant, with Rawls County. So, and at the same time, I think me and Chris are spinning up a podcast, and we're like, I wonder if we'll ever be able to dig at the cement company.
Well, that's interesting because my niece had gotten a hold of me and said, hey, these people are doing a podcast. Why don't you get a hold of them? I'm like, no. I've already done this, John Wingate and people writing other books too. Charles Stewart wrote his first book, and it was really bad. Please don't go out and buy it.
I don't think you can even find it, honestly. It's a segue of like, I think Brittany actually is the one that puts us together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Brittany makes the connections. Yes, she always has.
I was listening to you guys,
Yeah.
and I would call her and fill her in, and I'd say, hey, I think you really need to listen. Nope. I think we need to talk to him. No.
Yeah, and then Brittany did.
Yep.
And I said, okay, I'll call him. She goes, I'll give you the number. I'm like, okay, I'll call him.
Yeah. And so that's the other reason, right? Like that's the thing. Like if you go, you've been to my house and you saw the clown picture, which is actually Teddy Roosevelt. But if you go up to my main stair, there's two major pictures, and it's something that it took me a long time to track them down, and then a long time to go to almost 4 auctions for one because I kept losing. And then it would go up for auction again, and what they are is the actual original posters for Houdini. And so I own them. I own them both now. And the reason why I liked Houdini so much was because he was the greatest debunker. He single-handedly destroys the spiritual movement, the Fox sisters, all these different things. And if you just read his legacy, it's this really interesting about Houdini. But in this particular case, you never see a medium that is doing something shady want to be involved still. They won't put themselves in a predicament where they can be wrong. Right. But Brittany doesn't do that. And that's what always has intrigued me about her, is that she puts herself right in the fire. She's like, I'm still with this case. I'm still going to stand there with you. And she's making these connections for us. So when people ask, like, why have we involved mediums? It's not plural. It's one medium. And it's the medium that's kind of been there since the beginning, the one that made the connection between us and the Hoag family. And so that is why Brittany is very much a part of this. And whether you believe that or not, I'll tell you one thing. There are things that she's told me that give me goosebumps and that are scary. And we are, I believe, very close than we ever have been to coming to some closure with this. I really do. I really believe that 2023 is gonna unearth something, whether that's science or paranormal or whatever.
I would like to touch on them. Brittany is very good. She told me things in my reading that there's no way she could have looked on Facebook and knew it. I mean, she didn't even know what it was. She said, you'll figure it out later, and I did. Now, the other one that we don't want to name, because she doesn't want to be named, I have a very good relationship with her. I believe 100% that she is, not doing it for any wrong reasons. She didn't ask for no money or nothing. She came a very long way, not once, but twice. She has her reservations of why she doesn't want to be involved, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I do. But, she's she's touched my heart. I
Sure.
will say that.
She's coming from the right place for
she
sure.
is.
Yeah,
She
it's-
definitely is coming from the right place.
Oh, of course. And so everybody knows too, Brittany has never charged us a dime.
No.
She's never charged us a dime, never charged Shift or the Lost Boys of Hannibal anything. Like she's done everything pro bono for us. I mean, I can't guarantee that. I mean, it's her livelihood. She's actually helped out one of my friends locally here, and she absolutely loves her. I mean, fell apart. She lost a loved one. I said, if you're going to go down this route, let me get you somebody that I trust in this industry, and has been able to help her, through some of the darkest times of this person's life. So, I love Brittany. This is not like a fan page or shout out. But the thing is that I can't tell you how many times we get asked about it. And it's like, you know what, at least we're moving towards something. And, even if at the end of the day, we're 100% wrong or whatever, we know that we cross the T's and we dotted the I's. And I think that's the most important thing that we get from this too, is that a lot of the path has been laid. And we're starting to really like concrete zones. So, thanks to this relationship and us keeping you guys in the loop in everything we do, from skulls being found to, Ted Shanks recently when you guys went out there with Jan. I mean, that you can call us and we'll get him out there. We might not, but you have to do it, right? Because Ted Shanks would still be a thing right now if we didn't do what we did, right?
Well, the cement plant would still be a thing right now if we didn't do what we did. I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I want to thank both of you so much from the bottom of my heart and my family. Sorry, I get a little emotional here.
That's fine.
Because you all have given me answers to things I was afraid I'd never get answers to. And you've done it with you haven't asked for anything from me. Nothing, no money. You pick up all of our meals, and except for the one I jumped ahead of you real quick.
You got me. There's the cheese curds. That was too heavy. I couldn't get up.
I'll do it with, you don't get paid to do this at all.
No.
And I don't think people realize that. You do it on your own time and your own dime.
and it is a time commitment, a big time commitment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Baby, did you get all that? Because I'm just going to run with that. Cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's been a journey for us too. I mean, we'll talk about it coming up in the next few weeks, but when we were out the dig, it got emotional for us too. We got to the end of that, and Frankie and I are standing there. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it now, but it's like we were hoping that there was going to be some resolve, but we didn't get that. But then on the other hand, like you just said, we're checking off things that we wouldn't have had a chance to do otherwise. And that's the one thing that, it's a lot of work. I'm not to say that we don't like doing it, but this podcast is a lot of work. But it's for this podcast that gave us the opportunity to go do these things and have the help from law enforcement and from MoDOT and from all these other agencies that have come together and helped us try to check mark some of those things off.
And let's not forget the cement plant.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were very gracious in letting the family, Candace and I, go out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I can't thank them enough, because I talked to their HR representative in St. Louis, and she was just this really kind person. She's like, hey, we want to do this with you. If you could just remove certain things, and we'll get this done, we promise. And then, Sheriff Brad Stenson and Mark Flynn or Chris Flynn, we had all these great officers and sheriffs that really care about not only their town, but I think actually the lore, the myths, the things that surround all of what Hannibal is that, there's 100 things going on today that people are breaking the law, but at the same time, we still have these other cases that we need to solve. I mean, Hannibal is strange in the sense that it has 6 missing people from 1967 to now that have gone completely vanished. There's not a trace without them. Not many small town and communities can say that. It's a very mysterious and to a sense, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And it is kind of strange when you think about high strange areas with UFO activity and all that stuff that Hannibal kind of yields. Like, how does a tiny town like that yield 6 missing people that are just gone, without a trace?
2 of those weren't from Hannibal.
Well,
Surrounding
the region.
Surrounding areas.
Right.
Yeah, you could drive there and be like, oh God, here comes another missing person.
Well, Frankie, I think they kind of hinted on something that we need to catch up on the next episode. That might have to do with some other author.
I think that'd be a great idea, Chris, and I think I know you're a good steward of this show, Chris. So from all of us here, I want to thank Candace, and I want to thank Denise for joining us at our first ever YouTube podcast thing. Like we're becoming Joe Rogan. I know he's going to listen to this show and love it because actually our table looks really clean other than his, but whatever. But yeah, I want you thank you so much for coming out. I know it was a drive for you guys to get here, so thank you so much for being a part of our episode 1 on YouTube.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You got it. And Chris, from all of us here at the Lost Boys of Hannibal, we'll be seeing you.